Hello. The Federal Register is the official daily publication of the United States federal government. It is where the federal agencies and the President formally publish rules, proposed rules, notices, and presidential documents such as executive orders and proclamations. Today I'll introduce the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, called FERC, Combined Notice of Filings Number 1 by the Department of Energy, citation number 91 FR 39091-39093 from June 29, 2026. I'd like to hear from you in the comments below. It is always good to read the viewpoints of others, regardless of political affiliation, and it introduces myself to ideas that maybe I haven't considered before. I want to hear your feedback, so voice your opinion and push the like button and help subscribe if you want. Each week I review selected items from the Federal Register so everyone gets a no BS literal interpretation of what they are doing, of what they are really doing, and what other government officials might be saying about this. I'm Malcolm McCallum. I hold a PhD in environmental sciences and have for 30 years. I have over 30 years experience teaching in higher education. As an environmental scientist, my role is to research, educate, and inform about how the world of humans and the world of nature interact. The umbrella of this is called the socio-ecological world. The overarching purpose of this field is to protect the everyday people and natural world from the rich and powerful. So I believe by just explaining what news items appear in the Federal Register, I will be informing everyday people what the government is really doing, if they're working for you or someone else. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe so you can always be in the loop with what they want hidden by distraction campaigns on TV and radio. So, this Federal Register document that has been posted is the FERC Combined Notice of Filings Number 1, and it is citation number, so you can look it up. You can go on the web and look this up and see if I'm completely off base. It'll be called 91 FR 39091-39093. And what that stands for is it's the volume 91, the FR stands for Federal Register, and the other numbers, that's the pages that it's on. This was put out by the Department of Energy, which is part of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. It's document number 2026-13080. And this is a notice. As I said in the previous video, there are 4 different types of Federal Register documents: notices, rules, proposed rules, and presidential actions. The publication date was June 29th, 2026. The author, also called the signatory, is Carlos D. Clay, who is the Deputy Secretary. For the Office of Public Participation, you can call 202-502-6595, or you can email opp@ferc.gov. For other filing information, there are some other numbers, and you can look up go to the Federal Register and look it up if you'd like to know. So let's do a brief summary of this document, this notice. This Federal Register item is a FERC combined notice that publicly lists electric sector filings received by the Commission. It is not a final rule, and it does not itself approve or reject any project, rate, tariff, acquisition, interconnection agreement, or market-based rate request. It gives notice that interested parties may intervene, protest, or comment by the listed deadlines. And so you can actually contact the person at the phone number or email that I provided earlier, or is provided on the notice on the Federal Register, which you can easily look up just by typing in the actual notice number or document number along with Federal Register into your browser. The filing package includes one electric corporate filing under the Federal Power Act Section 203 involving Palo Duro Wind, Palo Duro Energy Storage, and Palo Duro Wind Interconnection Services. Then there are multiple electric rate filings under the Federal Power Act Section 205 and one foreign utility company status filing by Absolute Energy SPA. The rate filings include NIPSCO, Market-Based Rate Authority, PJM General Interconnection and Related Agreements, Southwest Power and Tool, also abbreviated herein as SPP, Network Service, and Tariff Revisions, Pacific Corp, SunZia Large Generator Interconnection Activity, Tucson Electric Service Agreements, Public Service Company of New Mexico, Cluster Study, Tariff Revisions, and other routine wholesale electric filings. This notice does not change national policy for electricity in of itself. It's a procedural notice, and it's announcing that FERC has received filings under the existing Federal Power Act procedures. The immediate policy effect is transparency. Okay? And that's something that a lot of us are always asking. Why isn't the government more transparent? Well, actually, they're pretty transparent. It's just that you don't look in the right places, and the right place is the Federal Register. The public, states, market participants, customers, and competitors are notified by this notice in the Federal Register that these filings exist and are given deadlines to intervene or protest. If FERC later accepts or approves the filings, individual tariff terms, service agreements, network integration transmission service agreements, corporate authorizations, or interconnection arrangements may change. Some filings are routine but still important because they govern how wholesale power markets, transmission service, generator interconnections, and RTO expansion arrangements operate at the legal and accounting level. So what is the rationale for this? Why is this notice being posted? Well, the rationale is rooted in FERC justification over wholesale electricity sales, transmission service, and certain public utility transactions. FERC explains that entities seeking market-based rate authority must make a Section 205 filing, and FERC must authorize certain transactions under the Section 203 before public utilities sell, lease, dispose of, merge, or otherwise transfer jurisdictional facilities or interests above statutory thresholds. Public notice gives affected parties a chance to participate before FERC acts. The practical rationale is that the grid, the electric grid, is increasingly interconnected, rate-based, and transaction-heavy. Filings like these are the paperwork layer that lets FERC maintain records of who owns or controls facilities, which tariffs are in effect, how generators connect to the grid, how network service is provided, and how RTO expansion is translated into enforceable tariff language. There are various current viewpoints, including local, state, and national comments in regard to this. There haven't really been any public comments from current politicians on the exact document that was published on this notice, that was published on June 29, 2026. But that's not really surprising. Combined filing notices are usually watched by lawyers, utilities, RTOs, and such, and especially sophisticated market participants, which basically boils down to giant corporations, rather than by members of Congress in public statements. Of course, it is the responsibility of members of Congress to provide oversight to these actions, and the fact that there are no comments may mean that they are not talking publicly, but it also may mean that they're busy on TV, grandstanding, and carrying on about nonsense rather than stuff that actually applies to your everyday life. My gut feeling would be is that it's the latter. At the national, my dog barked. At the national level, however, the underlying issues are politically active. Republican members have criticized FERC transmission planning reforms as potentially shifting costs to customers in states that do not benefit, while Democrats and FERC supporters argue that forward-looking planning can improve reliability and reduce long-term costs. In a 2024 House hearing, Republican leaders, including Jeff Duncan and Kathy McMorris Rodgers, criticized FERC Order Number 1920, while FERC Chair Willie Phillips defended the rule by emphasizing that customers should pay only for projects for which they benefit. Representative Frank Pallone defended the rule from the Democratic side. Recent 2026 comments show a cross-party concern for permitting certainty. Republican Senators John Curtis, Cynthia Lummis, and Shelley Moore Capito argued that projects should not be halted by shifting administrations, and that permitting should be technology neutral. Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse argued that the permitting reform cannot work in the executive branch unless the process to undermine renewable projects. Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse argued that permitting reform cannot work if the executive branch uses the process to undermine renewable projects, things like wind and solar. Democratic Senator Martin Heinrich cited SunZia as an example of why major energy infrastructure should not take 17 years to permit. At the state and regional level, there are adjacent comments related to SPP transmission governance. A June 2026 Kansas Reflector item reported that two Kansas legislators appealed to federal energy regulators about competitive bidding for transmission projects in the SPP region. That is not this docket, but it is directly relevant to the same grid governance world because this notice includes SPP tariff and network service filings. Direct Democratic a typical Republican or consumer cost critic would emphasize ratepayer protection, state authority, competition, grid reliability, and skepticism toward using FERC rules to advance climate or renewable energy preferences. Republicans often worry that broad transmission planning benefits can socialize costs across customers who do not clearly benefit. They may support interconnection and transmission improvements when framed as reliability, demand growth, AI data center readiness, or energy abundance, but oppose policies they see as preferential treatment for renewable resources. So I guess it's okay if they're preferential for non-renewable resources. A typical Democrat or clean energy view would emphasize that transmission, interconnection reform, storage, and RTO coordination are necessary to reduce congestion, connect low-cost clean generation, maintain reliability, and reduce emissions. Democrats are more likely to favor FERC planning reforms, and they include public participation, cost-benefit analysis, environmental justice, which, by the way, environmental justice is what environmental justice is that it protects the everyday person from the rich and powerful. That's all it does. That's what it is, period. It's always been that. And any other remarkable comment that comes out saying otherwise is either a lie or it's either disinformation or misinformation because someone doesn't know what they're talking about. And in the political and media climate, that's pretty typical. So environmental justice means if you're a normal person, it's protecting you from the billionaires. Okay, to be blunt. Or as I tell my students, it also means don't shit on the little guy. So, as I was saying, FERC planning reforms include public participation, cost-benefit analysis, environmental justice, and state involvement. They may also worry, this is the Democrats, may also worry that slow queues, weak transmission planning, and inconsistent political support lock in fossil fuel generation. I guess that they, on the same token, as I said, it's okay to benefit the non-renewable resources. The fact is that non-renewable resources still have a place and are important in our energy generation today. So, you've got to do things for both sides, not just one or the other, and show favoritism, which apparently both parties want to do. The real divide is not perfectly partisan, though. Many Republicans support faster permitting and reliable infrastructure, including some renewable projects once approved. Many Democrats support permitting reform, but want equal treatment for renewable energy and stronger guardrails for environmental and community impacts. And I think this is reasonable. I've seen oil pipelines break open in an Arkansas neighborhood, and it created devastation and public health problems that you just don't hear on the news because it was covered up. You've got to have regulation. Deregulation at any cost is nothing but letting people walk over the top of the poor, and heck with the poor, the average person. If you're a billionaire, you can walk over millionaires. So, moving right along. So what's the scholarly and technical background supporting or refuting these positions? Well, support for the pro-transmission, pro-interconnection position is actually pretty strong. FERC adopted Order Number 2023 to reduce interconnection backlogs, improve certainty, and ensure access to the transmission system for newer technologies such as storage. FERC Order Number 1920 is similarly intended to make long-term regional transmission planning more forward-looking, comprehensive, and cost-conscious. The SPP expansion is also a concrete example. Okay, so anyway, the SPP expansion is also a concrete example. Reuters reported that FERC approved SPP expansion into Western interconnection, enabling new Western members to participate in the regional markets and planning, with SPP projecting large annual benefits. Technical and scholarly studies also support the idea that better transmission and market integration can reduce generation costs, improve reliability, and integrate renewable resources. Recent work on interregional transmission and coordinated planning finds that transmission constraints matter, but also that planning methods influence cost and reliability outcomes. In other words, more transmission can help, but the design of the planning process matters. That isn't widely accepted across the policymakers. Evidence also supports the cost and siting concerns. Siting means that we're trying to decide where to put it, okay? Transmission lines and substations can fragment habitats, alter ecological corridors, disrupt vegetation and soils, and create local visual, land use, and community burdens. In other words, like you got to look out your window at a factory, okay? That's the kind of thing that it was, but when you moved there, you had a nice forest. That's the kind of thing it's talking about, okay? But also that planning... A 2025 scientific report study on transmission and transformation projects emphasized landscape connectivity and habitat fragmentation concerns. A Frontiers in Energy and Research study showed that incorporating environmental justice, remember environmental justice is protecting everyday people. That's what it is. So the study showed that incorporating environmental justice and environmental siting constraints can substantially alter where wind and transmission are placed, sometimes requiring more transmission to avoid higher risk locations. So the strongest Republican-style argument is that the cost allocation and project selection must be disciplined, transparent, and tied to demonstrable benefits. That's reasonable. The strongest Democratic-style argument is that delaying interconnection and transmission reforms can leave the grid more expensive, less reliable, and less able to decarbonize, meaning less able to reduce emissions of compounds that create climate change and also affect public health. Both of these arguments are well-founded. Unfortunately, our policymakers are busy barking at each other and saying my idea is better than yours when both their ideas are good and need to be compromised to create a solution that solves both problems. Imagine that. Grandstanding on TV about how great you are and what wonderful bill you put through that can't pass does nothing for society. Actually trying to solve problems by making a compromise and working together on the issues you think are important is what creates societal improvement. Period. Unfortunately, our politicians are busy pretending they're two 5-year-olds in the back seat saying, I'll quit it. So, how does this all relate to the big picture? And as I've said before, we live in what's called a socio-ecological system. And as a socio-ecological system, that means that we have a social system of economics, policies, and people's livelihoods. They work, they go to church, they do all kinds of things, go to the grocery store. These are part of the social system. And they are interconnected in a very complex network with the natural world. There are things you buy that originate from the natural world. The natural world provides different types of support to your backyard and to your life, such as cleaning the air or keeping the soil balanced so things will grow. So these two things interact. And this notice is relevant to that system because it concerns the administrative machinery that shapes electricity production, transmission, interconnection, storage, regional power markets, and the large-scale infrastructure development. The social side includes utilities, RTOs, developers, the state regulators, customers, landowners, municipalities, and federal regulators. The ecological side includes emissions, land use, habitat fragmentation, renewable energy siting, transmission corridors, and environmental consequences of generation choices. Even though this notice is procedural, it helps determine how quickly and under what tariff conditions energy resources and storage projects connect to the grid. That matters because grid access influences which power plants are built or retired, where renewables are located, whether storage is economically useful, and how transmission costs are allocated, and whether rural landscapes carry the infrastructure burden of urban and industrial power demand. So in summary, the impact on our environment, or this place that we live, our economic system, our environmental system, our everyday life, starts at the federal level with federal governance, and the impact on that is fairly moderate. The notice is procedural, but it is part of the FERC's public record keeping and participation system for electric rates, tariffs, interconnections, and corporate authorizations. In regards to electricity reliability, it's potentially positive if filings support better interconnection, network service, RTO expansion, and transmission coordination. Effects depend on later FERC action, though. How does it affect electricity costs and ratepayers? Well, that's mixed. Tariff and network service filings can improve market operation, but cost allocation and transmission service charges can affect customers. The renewable energy and storage sector is also impacted, and this is probably fairly positive because the notice includes wind storage and SunZia-related interconnection, a cluster study, and RTO expansion filings. Fossil fuel generation is a little more indirect. There is better transmission and interconnection that can reduce reliance on fossil generation, which is in some ways good because we are shipping less in from countries that maybe we politically do not support or agree with or want to interact with. But this is in constrained areas. It also could support load growth supplied by mixed resources, which would include both renewable and non-renewable resources. Land use and habitat are indirectly affected, but this indirect effect is important. Filings that enable generation and transmission projects can later produce rights-of-way, substations, corridors, or habitat impacts that were not actually expected by the public when this was sent out for review. Environmental justice and human communities in general will have mixed impacts from this. They could have better grid access, which could lower costs and emissions both, but infrastructure burdens often fall on specific rural, tribal, and low-income communities if siting is not handled carefully. Public participation is positive from this notice, but it is limited. The notice gives the legal opportunity to intervene or protest. You can call that number on the notice, but these dockets are technically dense and not easy for ordinary citizens to follow. The socio-ecological resilience, or how our everyday life can deal with this and maintain its current stature or even improve, is potentially positive. If, and this is an if the filings help create a more flexible, reliable, and lower emission grid. It could be negative if they enable poorly sited, and in other words, just throw it anywhere, infrastructure or unfair cost shifts that cause some people to have cost burdens that just plain don't line up with their needs. The bottom line is this. This notice isn't a flashy Federal Register action, but it is important infrastructure governance. It shows the administrative layer that makes wholesale electricity markets, RTO expansion, generator interconnection, storage integration, network service, and corporate authorization legally real. From a socio-ecological perspective, this is the quiet paperwork layer that affects how power, money, land use, emissions, grid reliability, and public participation interact. And you have an opportunity to interact by looking up this document on the Federal Register, grabbing the telephone or the email, and submitting a comment that tells what you think about this. Have a very nice day.